Thane over here. And I see someone from Andhra Pradesh, Trivandrum, Amit from Trivandrum. Great, so great to see you all. We are also live on YouTube right now, but please do keep your responses coming in. So Tushant from Ahmedabad, Abhishek from Mumbai. It's a pleasure hosting you all. I still want to give the other people in the here a second to connect. So just bear with me, keep those responses coming in the chat window. Keep letting us know the city you're dialing in from. Okay, I saw some responses in the Q&A window as well. Okay, I see Aarti from London. Hey, Aarti. Hey, Rahima, again from Thane, and I see Tejas from Nasik. Okay, great to have you all over here. With that, we are close to 150 people in the session now, so I'm going to go live and kickstart the session. Let me start with introducing the topic a little, right? So all of you, of course, saw the topic when you registered. You must have seen the landing page. But let's talk about this topic, which is extremely sensitive, extremely important, and extremely pertinent in today's day and age, right? India is going through a heat wave. We know all of us are experiencing it over here. The temperatures are through the roof and it's blistering over here, right? And all of this can be in some way connected to climate change, right? While some people may try to deny it, but from whatever research, whatever science has shown, it is a fact. Climate change is a part and parcel of our life. And one of the major contributors to climate change is, of course, carbon, the carbon emissions that we all generate, whether it's through driving, through industry, through animal husbandry. So all of these industries do contribute to the carbon emissions in the environment, and that contributes to the heat over here, right? In today's session, we are going to speak to Samban, a professor of economics, who's going to tell us more about what we can do to decarbonize our economies. It is important, carbon, we need the oil, we need the vehicles to be running, we need the industry to keep going, but what are the practices, what are the good approaches we can follow to decarbonize our economies? So we are going to speak on this extremely sensitive topic. I am going to introduce our speakers very shortly, but before I do that, I want to run the first poll for the evening, which is live on your screen right now. So if you can see on your screen right now, there's a question you'd see if you're dialing in from your cell phone. You click in the other options box, you'll be able to see the poll live over there. The question is, which is your preferred destination for further studies? I understand majority of you are either an undergrad college or have completed your undergrad education already. So we were looking to find from you which destination, which geography are you most interested in pursuing your further studies. So if you're looking for master's education, where would you prefer going? Would you prefer studying in Asia? Would you prefer studying in Europe, North America, Middle East, or some other geography? Asia also includes India, but do let us know your preferred destination for further studies. I'm going to keep this live for another 5 to 10 seconds. So if you haven't yet responded, please do. It would be great to see your response and get a feel of which is your preferred destination for further studies. Please do let us know by responding to the poll. All right, I see around 1/3 of the audience has responded. So I'm going to keep it open for another 3-4 seconds. If you haven't yet, please do respond. Okay, with that, I am going to go and end the poll now and quickly share the results as well. So yeah, around 18%, so 150 of the audience is looking at Asia, around 12% North America, 2% Middle East, 6% is elsewhere, and a good 60% plus 62% of the audience is looking to study in Europe, which is extremely interesting and extremely relevant, mainly because our university, the one which we are speaking to, is based in Europe, it's based in Italy, and we would get into the session with this, right? As I was mentioning, today's topic is around decarbonizing our economies. So what we can do to reduce the carbon emissions that we generate by our daily activities, by our consumption. So we are going to speak with Dr. Bosetti, who is a full professor at the Department of Economics at Bocconi University. She teaches environmental and climate change economics over there. She works on an ERC project on uncertainty and climate change and is chairwoman of TERNA SPA. She holds a PhD in computational mathematics and operations research from the University of Milan and has a master's degree in environmental and resource economics from the University College of London. She's worked as a senior researcher at FEEM from 2003 to 2018 and collaborates with CMCC since 2006. She's got several publications in the field of climate change and environmental economics, and she's the lead author for the 5th assessment report of the IPCC, and she will be the LA for the 6th AR as well. She's part of the Global Board Ready Women Initiative as well. So with that, let me invite Professor Bosetti to take over from here and tell us a little more about what we can do to decarbonize our economies. With that, over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you all for being here. Let me start my timer so that I don't take too much of your time. So it is a pleasure to be with you. And we are discussing right now the topic of climate change economics, if you want, or what and how we can decarbonize the economy. And I'll show you some slides while I speak, just to, because sometimes pictures can be more useful than words. So basically, I would start from this key concept that we have elaborated in the past year, the concept of the carbon budget. You might have heard it, but how many of you have no idea of what a carbon budget is? You can use the chat, I can read the chat. So the question is, whether you have no idea of what a carbon budget is. We are hosting this class because we want to present a master course that we're going to start next year in Milan, and the course is about sustainability, and in particular I'm going to teach the topic of environmental economics and climate change economics. So the carbon budget comes from this idea, or basically this discovery that has been made in many years. So if you look at this graph, you see two things. You see on the one axis cumulated CO2 emissions since the Industrial Revolution. Basically, this is what we have spewed into the atmosphere, burning fossil fuels. And on the other axis, we see temperature, actually global surface temperature increase since the pre-industrial times. So this is the anomaly, the change in the average temperature we have witnessed. And the dark line here, the black line, is history, represents what has happened in the past. Obviously, we have ups and downs because this is it's a phenomenon that are characterized by uncertainty, but we clearly see a linear relationship between cumulated emissions and the change in surface temperature. If we then look at the part that the shaded part, the part with colors, we see projections done with models, emission projections, and what that implies in terms of temperature. So now, think you are a policymaker in India who wants to obtain the target of not increasing the temperature of the planet more than 2 degrees above the pre-industrial level. So now, by looking at this graph, you can basically run along the line and get a sense of what are the cumulated emissions, cumulated CO2 emissions that would allow to attain that target. That means that basically you have an amount of carbon, and knowing how much you've emitted so far for the globe, and knowing how much it has been emitted so far, you know how much carbon we can emit still whilst remaining below 2 degrees. And you can generate a carbon budget for 1.5 increase in temperature and other targets that you deem are optimal. In particular, we know that the Paris Agreement aims at keeping us well below 2 degrees Celsius. Now, if I have a carbon budget as any other budget, I can use it in different ways. So I can use the budget all now and leave nothing for later, or I can use it wisely in time. That means very different pathways of emissions, which I'm showing you here. So if you look at, for example, most of the red pathways, they keep emissions at the level, around 2030 and 2040, around the levels we are having today. And then they decrease emissions, in a not too rapid way. But then at a certain point, the second half of the century, emissions are crossing the zero line. So the same budget used the blue way can be used decreasing emissions more rapidly now and never going to net negative emissions. So depending how I use the budget, I can reduce more today and then never need to use technologies that allow me to suck CO2 from the atmosphere, or I can emit more today, but then I have to compensate tomorrow and take that CO2 in excess that would not allow me to be within my budget. I have to take that away from the atmosphere. The time I reach net zero is the famous CO2 net zero target that you probably have heard a lot being discussed these days. So let me repeat this idea. Once I have a budget, once I have decided on a climate objective, there's no single way to obtain that objective. I can obtain that objective in very different ways, and that will have very different consequences on my life, on your life, and on the life of your children. In particular, at some point, I will have to bring emissions to net zero, CO2 emissions to net zero. First of all, net zero doesn't mean all emissions in all sectors, in all countries, CO2 emissions have to be zero. It can be that in some sectors I still emit positive emissions, and in some sector I'm compensating. It can be that in some countries I still emit some emissions, and other countries are emitting a lot, are sucking away a lot of CO2 from the atmosphere, compensating for this positive CO2 emissions of those countries. But in the end, global emissions have to go, CO2 emissions have to go to net zero to stabilize temperature. As soon as we get emissions, CO2 emissions to net zero, the temperature very rapidly will stabilize. And in particular, the timing of reaching net zero is around the 2050, 2060 for a 1.5 degrees Celsius target, and as late as 2070 for a 2 degrees target. Again, net zero doesn't mean zero everywhere and zero in every region and in every sector. So what does that mean? It means that if I look at profile, for the globe, for example, this is just illustrative. It's not it could be a region, it could be the whole globe. We're going to have emissions of other gases, non-CO2, that are here shown in orange. Gray emissions, which are fossil CO2 emissions. Emissions from managed land, which is emissions, for example, from agriculture or deforestation. And then carbon dioxide removal, CDR, which are in green. The dark green and the light green. Dark green represents removals from managed land, and light green represents any other form of removal. We could have technologies such as producing with bioenergy electricity, and at the plant where we produce electricity with biomass and with zero emissions, we capture the CO2 and store it underground. The process then is a negative emissions production of electricity process. This is one possibility. We could actually take CO2 away from the atmosphere. Any of these technologies at some point will be necessary to compensate for other sectors. Henceforth, the net CO2 emissions profile, which is the dashed line here, is going to be obviously the composition of the positive emissions remaining in some sector and the removals. The time is when this dashed line, the time of net zero CO2, is when this dashed line crosses the zero line. Now, using the carbon budget differently means very different things for temperature. Let me start from the graph on the left, the red profiles of emissions. In these cases, I'm using the budget, allowing for compensation later, allowing overusing the budget, overshooting the temperature, and then taking away CO2 from the atmosphere. This way of using the budget may bring temperature up to a third of a degree Celsius above the temperature I want to reach. Is that important or not? Well, if you think that crossing some temperature thresholds, you might, for example, destroy coral reefs, or you might, for example, increase the number of heat waves in India to a level that is not acceptable, then you want to use the carbon budget in a way that is the one on the right, the blue way of using the budget, which is without allowing for net negative emissions and using the budget by reducing emissions more rapidly and never going to net zero. So temperature in the second set of profiles of emissions is never overshoot. Given your target, you stay at the target and never go above the target. And this is true, notwithstanding you want to, reach a 2 degrees or 1.5 degree or whatever target policymakers think is the most appropriate. So where are actually greenhouse gas emissions heading? Where are we going if we do nothing? The good news for you is that with respect, when I started this job, where basically I would show you profile of emissions growing indefinitely, what we see what we expect in terms of projected greenhouse gas emissions given implemented policy is the red line or area, because obviously there's always uncertainty that you see here. So basically we see emissions at some point in time will peak if we don't do much more than we have already defined and written in law today. Obviously you need more to stay below the 1.5, especially if you don't want to overshoot the 1.5, and even if you want to stay below 2 degrees Celsius. Now, the most likely profile is something like the purple or dark blue that I'm showing you here, where basically we will postpone some of the action, and then in 2030, we'll become very seriously globally in tackling emissions. And then obviously we will have to reduce emissions more rapidly than we would have done otherwise. And rapidity can basically represent a cost. What are the investments required for the changes we're talking about? So let's talk about the 1.5 temperature scenario, which is a very stringent scenario where we really are aiming at limiting the warming we're going to see. What you see in the graph here are current expenditure in energy, and the colors, the green, the purple, the yellow are all carbon-free technologies, from wind to efficiency or other low-carbon fuels. And then the dark brown and gray and black on the top are fossil associated investments. And what you see today, we are basically at a 50-50 share. Okay, 50% of investments we are doing in energy are dedicated to fossil, either extraction or production or generation, or the other half is dedicated to carbon-free technologies. Where should we go in 2030 to be within the target of the 1.5? Well, these are numbers coming from different models, and you see the results is quite robust. There might be small differences from one model to the other, but approximately all of the models see as a result that 80% of investments is now devoted to carbon-free technologies and only 20% to fossil. And basically coal, especially coal extraction, is disappearing. We still have some investment in gas and some investment in oil. What happens in 2050 is that this trend increases even more, and investment in the transmission and distribution and storage become very, very important, together with investments in efficiency and other low carbon fuel. Why do we need a lot of investment in transmission and distribution and storage? Because if we start to have a lot of renewables, obviously we have to have a very different grid, and we have to have a lot of storage to compensate for the intermittency that renewable bring to the system. Okay, there are options available now in every sector that can at least halve emissions by 2030. This is a finding from the very latest IPCC report, the Working Group 3 assessment of the IPCC. And if you look at the report, please look at the summary for policymaker. The report itself is hundreds of pages, maybe too much for a master's student, but the summary for policymaker contains everything you need to know on climate change mitigation, and is a key informative piece of text that you should all be reading, especially if you want to be prepared for what is going to be the fight of your generation. So what we see, what are these key options? What are the key technological elements? First ingredient is that we have to decarbonize the way we produce electricity. Why? Because then, second ingredient, we're going to use electricity to do most of the things we're now doing with other fuels. That means we're going to use electricity to heat our homes. We're going to use electricity to travel around with our cars. We might even use electricity for the transportation of, of goods. So electricity is going to be crucial, and it needs, but it crucially needs to be produced with carbon-free technologies. Can we use electricity to decarbonize the industrial sector as well? Yes, we can, partly. Some processes will still require the use of, very high temperature ovens. That means that you will need furnaces. That means that you will need to burn some fossil fuels for some of the processes. And that means that in some other sectors, you will have to compensate for those emissions. In urban environments, electrification is going to be crucial together with high density urban environment. Together, these two ingredients, the high density and electrification, can really bring a lot to the decarbonization process. Obviously, building and transport that I mentioned before. Now, how do we decarbonize the energy system? How do we decarbonize the production of electricity? On the one hand, there can be still some production using fossil fuels with the help of carbon capture and storage. This is what CCS stands for, which are technologies that basically capture CO2 when you're producing electricity and store it underground. This is a very similar process of the one we've done, but in reverse. We've taken fossil carbon and released it in the atmosphere. The idea is that we take it from the atmosphere and we bring it back where it was. Obviously, renewable is going to be a very, very important technology. This, can be embodied by solar technologies, concentrated solar power, but also wind. Offshore wind has traditionally had higher costs than the other technology, but the costs are coming down and the capacity potential is very high. Other ways, as I mentioned before, may be important to remove carbon, and these technologies are these technologies that you're going to be studying and that then we're going to deploy in the second part of the century. So this is just a zoom in on the cost of some technologies. You've all heard about the fact that photovoltaic costs have gone down. What you see here is the cost going down in time, and then you see a gray area. That gray area is what it takes to be competitive with fossil. And what you see is that clearly, the competitiveness has been reached. Now, it depends obviously on how much sun you have in a specific area. It depends on other characteristics of your system, but the cost competitiveness for photovoltaics has been largely attained. Similarly, for onshore wind, which was actually cost competitive, already a few years ago. And in some cases, like batteries for passenger electric vehicles, the cost has gone down so rapidly that nobody expected that. Even experts that I've been interviewing 10 years ago were totally off, and the costs have decreased more than double they expected. And this is bringing me to the last point I want to make, that of technology and that of technology innovation. So we think we know what the system boundaries are, but the system boundaries keep changing. And they don't change just because, they change in response to policy. So policies that we put in place have pushed the technological innovation that have brought down the cost of solar PV. So this is an important element to keep in consideration, because some of you might want to study exactly the process of innovation in the context of green technologies and carbon-free technologies. And that is going to be of key importance for government and for the private sector. Okay, just to leave you with some sense or a positive note, because I showed you a great challenge, but I want to show you that, it's not impossible. Current policies that have been put forward by countries are a very complex mix of multiple instruments. In some cases, you have your typical pricing, the externality, meaning pricing emissions, carbon taxes, emission trading scheme, what we have in Europe, but also now in China. In some other cases, we've seen other kind of policy. Not all of them were market-based. In some cases they were, as for example, subsidies to renewable. In some cases, we've seen mandates, standards, a very complex mix of policies. More recently, then, a set of standards have been put forward. And I'm showing you here the ones that were pledged before the last COP. And then I'll show you the effect of India's latest pledge in terms of mid-century strategy, because India pledged a 2070 mid-century strategy. So this is what I promised. So this is the final, end of century temperature we might achieve with some probability. So you see, it's never, I'm showing you a number, but it's always a range, with various types of policies in place. So in 2020, given the policies countries had pledged for, we would expect reaching something or temperature around 2.63 degrees Celsius at the end of the century. With COP26, we brought down this expected temperature increase by the end of the century to 2.3. Before COP26, a lot of pledges were made in terms of mid-century strategies by several countries, and this has brought us down to 2.0 degrees Celsius increase in temperature by the end of the century as a projection. And then with the pledges made at COP, notably among others by India, we see that we really are in a range that is now well below 2 degrees. But remember, these are pledges, these are promises made of what is going to happen in 2050. And an important task you will have is to see whether governments and firms are actually moving in the direction of this 2050, 2060, or 2070 commitment. But if all has been promised were to be put in place, again, I show you a line of emissions that is current policy, what we have, in place up to now. I show you the emissions you would want to do to really be on a 2 degrees Celsius trajectory. And then I showed you the mid-century strategy. And the mid-century strategy already brings us 2/3 of the way. So if implemented, so if we're really moving there, we are 2/3 of the way of where we need to go. To recap, I showed you the role of overshoot, pathways, and negative emission technologies. Why did I show you that? Why do you need to care about how we use the carbon budget? Because how we use the carbon budget really affects how much I pay for climate policy versus how much you will pay for climate policy. The more we delay action, the more we promise, okay, we'll do something. We'll use the carbon budget by, emitting more today, but then doing negative emission technologies tomorrow. Some of that strategy is really playing with your future, because you're going to be punished in two ways. We're going to see higher temperature in the second half of the century anyways, and then we're postponing the cost of climate policy to the second part of the century. So that's why you need to care how the carbon budget is used, which carbon budget we decide to to pursue, because that means, that tells us what's the temperature we're gonna maximum temperature increase we're gonna get, average temperature increase we're gonna get by the end of the century. And then I showed you the investment requirements. I didn't stress that much, but we won't need that much more money. We just need to redirect investment, to shift the way we spend the money. So it's not really a matter of finding the money, but it's a matter of finding money, we are not used to find, because we are used to finance the energy sector. We just have to change the way we use that money. And then a second important shift is where the money goes, because most of these investments will have to happen in developing countries. That's also why it's so important that you study this topic, because it's going to be in your countries that these investments take place, and you have to make sure that they're done properly and in the right technologies. Finally, I showed you the potential role of mid-century strategies. These are important promises that countries have made. They could get us, in the direction we want to go, but we have to make sure that promises are followed by action. I hope that was of interest to you. I hope, if you have any question, I'm here for you. And with that, I hope to see you in class soon.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for that insightful session. I'm not sure if the audience has questions, but if you do, please do let us know. Please post in the Q&A window. Okay, I do see a question coming in. And this is from Hiren, who's asking, why is sustainable diet not being discussed widely to reduce carbon emissions? So basically emissions related to farming and food production.
Well, that's a good question. Actually, I have a project running now, exactly studying the drivers of diets, because obviously, as you're pointing to, this is an important source of personal emissions. Now, if you were to calculate the carbon footprint of the average person, this is something that you can easily change. Other actions are probably more powerful. For example, whom you vote for, and any activity that you do to push governments towards decreasing emissions, because that's where most of the emissions are coming from, is the power sector, and it's harder for you to discriminate. It's always power for you, unless you really are, you pay attention and you only buy renewable electricity. Electricity is sort of all the same. So the place where you have most lever of action is indeed, as you're saying, the choice that you make in terms of diets. Actually, for studying the drivers of the role of emissions from diets, it turns out that this is, India is one of those countries that is the most, we should all follow the example of India, because it's really showing how to have a diet with a very low impact by having so reduced consumption of red meat. And so I guess many countries will have to learn in the future from, the type of diet that you follow in India.
That is interesting, and thank you for saying that. And I do have another question coming in, and I hope, Hiren, your question got answered. And there's this question by Trushank, which I'm going to pick up. But Professor, before we get to that, I actually wanted to jump in with a personal question as well, which is around electric vehicles. So, electric vehicles are being touted as the panacea to all oil pollution, or the vehicle emissions pollution that we cause. But there are allegations that, again, since electricity is in India especially is very carbon dependent, right? It's very coal dependent production. Electric vehicles are actually as polluting as fossil fuel vehicles. So any opinion, any research around that?
So it's very important, and anybody who's gonna take this course, anybody should have this difference clear in their mind. So you have two types of pollution. Pollution that is global, climate change related pollution is a global pollution. You don't care where it comes from, you don't care where it goes. And indeed, if you are producing electricity with coal, you might generate more of this pollution with an electric car. A different kind of pollution, though, as important as the global climate change pollution, is local air pollution. And for that, really, electric transport solves the problems and saves a lot of lives. Indeed, in several European countries, cities, as well as in several Indian cities and Chinese cities, we have a huge problem with local air pollution. That's a different type of problem, but as important. And this is why we're going to study environmental economics. Climate change should not be solved as a problem in a vacuum. There are many other environmental problems that we should take into account, and solve them together will allow us really to make a difference. Similarly, if we want to solve the problem of climate change just through biomass, bioenergy, then we might generate a huge problem on the cost of food. And we don't want to do that. We want to keep both problems in our mind, so that when we solve the problem of climate change, we don't create new problems altogether or exacerbate existing ones.
That's fair, and that's interesting. With that, I want to go to Prashant's question, who's asking studies around decarbonizing and climate change. These are relevant to students from which background? Do you have any background? When you look at your cohort and you admit students to the program, do you look at students with any specific background coming into these programs, the sustainability or environmental focused programs, or are these open to students from various backgrounds as well?
I think you're going to discuss this more later, but I think the most exciting is for students who have a technological / scientific background to understand the economic side of the problem they've studied. And for students who studied traditional economics or management, to look at the environmental impact of what that typically is not studied in undergrad as undergrads in management or economics. So I think the objective, there are going to be pre-courses to try to put everyone on the same ground in terms of basic requirements, but the objective is to really take people speaking different language, talking together, because that's the beauty of the job that I do. When you do run these models, you have a team where you have somebody who's an expert in pollution, and she's talking with somebody who's an expert in farming and land use, and they're both talking to somebody who's an expert in energy engineering, and then they have to talk with the expert in public policy. And you need to respect these different backgrounds. Through this course, the idea is to create people who can speak to all these different all these different disciplines, because to be able to solve these problems, you have to be able to understand a minimum of all these different topics.
That's interesting, and thank you for giving that insight. And with that, let me take this next highly voted question, which is from Yash. His question is that policymakers lack the foresight and expertise when it comes to making policy for a sustainable future. His question is, why isn't sustainable development a primary agenda for governments in most of the countries, right? I mean, we see this challenge across the board that you're getting elected to a political office is very different, and having expertise in that discipline is different. So anything that you have seen as best practices in Italy or elsewhere in the world, where policy making and scientific research on that topic have come together to design any interesting policies?
Well, I think, I collaborate with a lot of researchers at TERI, TERI. It's an institute in India. They are great in their level of expertise. They're really, top scientists, and they do work a lot with policymakers to try to show the potential benefits of the policies that they're studying. And I think we have in Italy a history whereby people working in the governments are typically lawyers, and as a background, for them it's harder to get a sense of some of the technical issues. And now this is changing, and I think maybe that doesn't apply just to Italy. That's a more general problem, to have more and more people with or people working as politicians with at least some background, so that at least they can communicate with experts and trust wise experts while distrusting unwise experts. I think COVID really gave a momentum for this. It's not, there was a very strong period, a very long period where the distrust in science was penetrating our society, and although there has been some problems, obviously there always are pockets of people who distrust science. The COVID pandemic has helped, people regaining faith in scientists. Economists may be the only experts who, with the big economic shock, have still some way to go to regain the full faith of policymakers, and I guess that's why a lot of people are trying to get an education that is broader than purely just economics or management, but enriched by this more technical background, because it really gives you credibility when you know both the technologies or the science, and you have the economic take. The economic edge allows you to be in the room with economists without being fooled, and the technological edge allows you to, be able to explain economists how, things actually work in the industrial sector, etc. So I think both is what you're really aiming, and that's what makes you an expert that can really convince policymaker and get trust from policymaker.
Thank you for that. The next question I have, which I want to take, is from Shrutir. He's asking your views on bioenergy and nuclear energy to attain energy security, and also if it's easier to be integrated with T&D, so transmission and distribution grids. So if you have any views on bioenergy and nuclear energy as replacement to the traditional fuel sources. And also we saw this in Japan, of course, I'm going to link this to another aspect. So Japan is again moving away from nuclear energy because of the Fukushima disaster a couple of years ago. So any views that you have on bioenergy and nuclear energy as such?
I will start by commenting the fact that risks, the perception of risks, is something that I study for a long time and really is shaped by culture, experience. And so even one generation from the next, you might have a different perception of risks. And policymakers respond, obviously, to the perception, to this perception. So the role of nuclear hinges on the collective perception in a country of this specific risk. And for example, in Italy, we had a referendum that outlawed nuclear from the night to the morning afterwards. A lot of experts, a lot of nuclear engineers with no job, all of a sudden. And now that, something like 50 years, a little less, have passed, it may be time when people are starting to talk about this technology again without being thrown away from the room. So the role of nuclear, the role that nuclear will play, really depends on the specifics of the country. Think of France. It is news of today in Europe that Germany is fighting against France. France wants nuclear to be defined as sustainable, and Germany wants nuclear to be defined not as sustainable, as non-sustainable. And these are countries that culturally are fine, not very far from one from the other, but still there's these big differences. So perception of risk will play a key role. Bioenergy is a valid option because the technology is not that, the idea is, we know how to use it. We know how to deal with bioenergy, generating power with biomass. The big element is, can we grow, can we use residues? Can we build a system of biomass for power that doesn't really crashes with the production of food? That's you know, that depending on, again, on the country, on the availability of land. It will depend from the country context. Obviously, both these technologies are easier to integrate than renewables. So we know that in the next 20 years, we're going to need something together with renewables to make the system, you know, safe and reliable. And depending on where you are, it might be gas, it might be biomass, it might be nuclear, and then at some point there will be either a phase out of this technology and then something else will come along, or we're going to start to use ways of sequestering CO2 if we keep using biomass. So there will be an evolution, but some other technologies on top of renewables are obviously going to be needed to, you know, make the system reliable, maintaining the reliability of the system.
Thank you for that. And the next question I have is slightly longish. This has come from Fatima, and I remember she's dialing in from Lahore for us today. So welcome, Fatima, and thank you for attending this session. Her question is about calculating individuals' carbon footprints rather than industry's carbon footprint. So instead of just looking at, say, the automobile sector or looking at your energy or mining sector separately, calculate one individual's carbon footprints, maybe through an app or something like that, and focus on tackling that at an individual level. Does that make good economic sense, or that doesn't work at all?
So this is another great question. So we have had some debates in class, because you have to keep in mind that the idea of a carbon footprint is an idea that emerged from an oil company, and it was a clear way to make you aware of your responsibility in emitting, and sort of allowing you to feel the full guilt of these emissions. I think it's still a valid instrument if you want to control and if you want to have a sense of how much emissions your life produces. But if you look at the latest work done at Paris School of Economics by the group, I mean, you all probably know Piketty and his work on income inequality. He also has some work done on carbon inequality. So the carbon, you know, associated with the income. And what it shows is that basically, you know, for the bulk of most people, emissions are associated with what we were saying before. I mean, transport, heating the house, and what we eat. And then for the very rich, where most of the emissions are, most of their emissions, 70% of their emissions are associated to their investments. So you could think of your emissions as associated to you know, your consumption, and then emissions associated to your investments. And me personally, I mean, I'm a professor, I don't invest much, so I have zero emissions associated with my investment. But the bulk of emissions come from these investments that, you know, the 10% of the most rich people are doing. So when you start to think about the carbon footprint, you know, it's a richer discussion than you first think. And I will leave you with this comment. I have a colleague, she studied environmental psychology, and she always does the carbon footprint with her class. And as I said, it's a nice exercise, but the exercise tends to be depressing, because you start to reduce more and more. You try to move as many levers as you can, but then you realize the only way you could bring your emissions to zero is by not existing. Why? Because a bulk of emissions do not depend on what you do. There is a part of those emissions that do not depend on you. And I don't want anybody to think that it should not exist. I want anybody to think that they could come with me and convince governments to decarbonize the power sector, to decarbonize other industrial sector, so that we can, you know, do what we can, but then being helped by the governments in reducing our emissions.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And the last question I have is from Tahir. I'm not sure if I'm not sure about the relevance of this question, but I still want to take this up. So Tahir's question is around European economies being known for stability, natural beauty, and generating a lot of revenue through tourism. And his question is if changing this to finance to native continents would help gain more monetary benefits for Europe. So I'm not sure if there's a trade-off between tourism and finance as the industries, but or I'm not sure if I got the question correct. But Professor, if you have any opinion on this, we can take this particular question and then move on to talking about the programs at Bocconi.
Okay, first of all, Tahir, if we didn't get your question right, maybe you want to come and then we're going to discuss this in class. I guess on the one hand, better environmental policy will investing in environmental protection will obviously increase tourism. There is also great research done on the implication on tourism of climate change, and it will affect very badly some countries. Unfortunately, my country, Italy, and your country are both going to be potentially affected very negatively because people won't want to go to have, spend their summer in Venice when there are 40 degrees Celsius and you cannot go around. So there are many links between tourism and environmental protection and environmental policy. And it's very important to keep that in mind, not just for Europe, but also for India. Having said that, I would, I'd really want to thank you because normally these sessions are very, you think you are talking to the, to the wall or actually your screen. Instead, I really want to thank you for all your insightful questions and truly hope to see you in class and have a lot of debates about these issues when we will be together.
Thank you, Professor. To the audience, we are not yet done. We are going to speak a little more about the programs at Bocconi. But at this point, I want to thank Professor Bosetti for taking out the time and doing this session. And I'm going to let her go because she's got another class and meetings to get to. But at this point, I'm going to invite Veronica to tell us more about the programs at Bocconi and what you can do if you're looking to study over there. Welcome, Veronica. And over to you. If you want to take them through your slide, the presentation, that would be great. And we'll run the next poll for the evening after that.
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, but I think the screen sharing is still updating.
I'm waiting, it takes a minute, here it is.
Yep, now we can see it.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjay. I just wanted to give some context to the lecture that we have been hearing today from Professor Bosetti, who is a teacher, a professor in the Master of Science in Transformative Sustainability that we recently launched. If you don't know about Bocconi, Bocconi University is a business school located in Milano, Italy. I mean, the most renowned feature is its recognition in international rankings, in the Financial Times 1, especially for the Master in Finance and the Master in International Management, and in the QS rankings. We're very well positioned. Rankings are a good way to understand if your diploma will be well received by companies in different parts of the world. Besides this new program that we forgot to mention, that it's a double degree, a joint degree with Polytechnic of Milano that you might have heard. There are a lot of students even from India that come to Italy and to Milano, especially for Politecnico, which is one of the best engineering schools in Europe. So coupled with Bocconi, 50 in Europe as a business school, this is a good deal to learn, as Professor Bosetti mentioned, to become a professional able to juggle with lawyers, with technicians, with managers, with politicians about sustainability and ESG issues that are more and more a compulsory part of everyday job in our life, in our university as well, We have put in place a lot of actions to reduce waste, to make our campus more sustainable. So it's really something that permeates everyday life. And what's important is that Bocconi tries to go towards the job market requests. Recently, with Sanjay and our partnership, we also heard from Indian alumni that after a master in international management are now working at IBM in London or in Dubai, or they became entrepreneurs. So I would say a good springboard to come to Milano and to start your career in Europe, but also back home or in Middle East or in US and so on. So the programs you see here are many. At the end of this presentation, I will also give you a link where you can delve a bit more into the whole programs. If you get excited about the one in transformative sustainability, here is very quickly, you can take a screenshot, the study plan and the subject that are gonna taught. Basically, every semester you are in a different area of the city because you are 6 months at Bocconi and 6 months at Polytech, 6 months at Politecnico that are based in different sides of the city. Most importantly, an internship is a compulsory element of evaluation. Is a compulsory element of your learning, and Bocconi aim is find you a good job. You see in the photo, this is one of our career fairs. We are already, Professor Bosetti and the program director, Professor Perrini, they are already working with companies, explaining this program and how the graduates from this program will be necessary in a lot of companies and multinationals and institutions. So we do our best, starting from day one, to connect students and the job market. And numbers speak for themselves. So more than 30% work abroad. Many receive 6 to 9 offers upon graduation for jobs. They do 5 to 7 interviews. So again, I think Bocconi is a good passport that opens doors. Then, as I always say to all students, it's you who need to do the job interview, but we make the most to prepare you, to make you ready to win the job interview. Last but not least, I will be quick, Sanjay, because we are, I think, right in time, right? If you are interested in applying, got excited and you may have already a GMAT ready, you can still apply for admission to the Master of Science in Transformative Sustainability by 26th of May. Okay, and to all the other masters by 9th of June. So if you think about yourself in Milano in September, you still have time to do that. You just need basically to have your GMAT ready. Last information, in the past years, Bocconi has been contributed a lot to students' financial aid. So with a good GMAT, a good motivation and a good CV, we are ready to provide full merit scholarships to students to welcome more and more talented students in our campus and our city. I don't know how much time I have, Sanjay, otherwise I talk for hours. I just wanted to give students, our email address for future questions. Then I'm ready for questions also.
Sure, we'll surely take the questions. And in fact, I did want to speak to you about this, that you mentioned in the previous sessions, you mentioned that a lot of the Bocconi graduates do end up working in the UK, right? A lot of them end up working in London. So that is extremely interesting as well. And I'm sure a lot of Indians do look forward to building a career in Europe and especially in the UK. But before we take these questions from the audience, I quickly want to run our second poll for the evening and check with the audience their preferred field of study. So those of you who can hear me, we still have 200 people in the audience. If you can let us know, if you can see the poll question on your screen now, it is about which field of study are you most interested in? Are you looking to build are you looking to study international management or management? Are you interested in marketing, finance, accounting, financial management? Are you interested in economics and management in arts, culture, media, so on and so forth, in innovation, technology, cyber risk strategy, and all of these? Unfortunately, we don't have since we had limited choices to put in over here, we haven't put the option for anything in sustainability. But if any of the other areas that appeal to you, which is politics, policy analysis, social sciences, innovation and technology, do let us know your preferred field of study for your further studies. Okay, I do have around 60 responses. I'm going to keep this open for another 5 seconds. So if you haven't yet responded, please do let us know your preferred field of study. You're going forward, what would you want to study? You would look to study international management or management. You're looking at marketing, finance, economics and management, social sciences, politics, policy analysis, data science, cyber risk strategy, and so on and so forth. So let us know your preferred field of study for your further studies. And great, with that, I have around 70 responses. So I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to quickly share the results for a second. We'll not go through them individually, but a lot of interest towards international management and management, followed by marketing, finance, economics, politics, data sciences, and so forth, so on and so forth. Great. Thank you for responding to that poll. If you have any questions for Veronica, she did share some slides about the programs at Bocconi, some employment statistics as well. So if you have any questions for her, please post them in the Q&A window. I'd be happy to take those on. And Veronica, if I can request you to share the slide once more. I wanted to go through some of those slides with the audience now to understand a little more about them. In the meanwhile, the audience, you can keep posting your questions in the Q&A window, and I would take them up. I wanted to see the rankings and the fees. So if we can look at slide 2, okay. So Bocconi ranks 6th. Sorry.
Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah.
Okay. So 6th for Masters in Finance in the Financial Times rankings, 16th for Masters in Management in the world, 12th for the MBA, and the 5th best European business school. So you're amongst the top across Europe, across programs. In the QS
yes, and Sanjay, to be honest, the Master of Science in Finance is the one that you are mentioning, where basically more than half of the graduates end up in the City of London, in Goldman Sachs, in JP Morgan, in this kind of institution. But it's also because in London there are at the moment more than 3,000 Bocconi graduates, who of course work on all these institutions, and so they're happy to hire from their home university. So this is the main reason. Of course, it's not just finance. I was talking a few days ago with a student who is coming from South Africa and then to Bocconi, and then now works in a digital company related to pharma and health in UK, in London. So it's not just about finance. In fact, even about management, let's say that international management, which is the one ranked 16, is just one, let's say the top of the iceberg of many courses related to management, also about innovation and technology, or about fashion and luxury, Milano, of course, or even about government and international institutions. So again, being a business school, we are able to delve very deep in different sectors. So studying what are the different types of administering and managing a company from the health sector or the public sector or the finance sector. And so this is a very important point I wanted to make, sorry.
No problem. That's great to hear. And Veronica, if I can request you to go to the slide on the eligibility, there are some questions which have come in the chat window around eligibility for the various programs. So if you can look at the eligibility once more.
Yes, of course, we let's say that we are not able in this moment to waive the GMAT or the GRE. First, we are in direct touch with the GMAC, and they also provide it online in many countries. So for us, it's an important way to also compare students coming from different countries, study, learning environments, programs, because we accept and we welcome also graduates coming from non-economics or non-business sector. So if you have been a bachelor in biology or in humanities, you are still able to apply. The GMAT or the GRE will tell us that you still have a good level and a good knowledge, because as Professor Bosetti mentioned before, we have preparatory courses for all our students to make sure we all start with the right foot, but of course we need some evidence. At master upper level, I also would say that the personal statement is a very important element that truly contributes to admission. I saw students with stellar GMAT who did not get admitted, and students with a lower GMAT who got admitted because they showed their interest, their motivation, that they have a clear aim. I want to study finance because in my future I see myself here. So this is for us, a guarantee that students will succeed. About Ielts or Toefl, okay, we need the level B2. I think Ielts 6, Toefl 88.
Okay. So Veronica, on that question, is there any possibility to get a waiver for the Ielts or the Toefl? Because a lot of universities now look at if the medium of instruction at the undergraduate level is in English, then they waive off the Ielts or Toefl requirement. Does Bosetti?
Absolutely, yes, Sanjay. So if a student has a bachelor awarded in English, we don't need anything else.
Oh, perfect. So basically, if you have done your undergraduate education, right, your bachelor studies, where your medium of instruction, the medium of teaching was in English, then you can get an Ielts or Toefl waiver and apply without an Ielts or Toefl score. So that really helps. And now I also see the deadlines on the screen. So for the Transformative Sustainability Program, possibly another 10 days to make an application. So 26th May is the deadline. And for the other MSc programs, 9 June is the deadline. Do you still have some spots available for the 2022 intakes? Or should candidates still look at applying for the 2022 intake? Or are you already full with Indian applicants? Is that the case? Veronica?
Sorry?
Do you still have spots available for the fall 2022 intake?
Absolutely. For both, for all the programs, we have a few spots and also a few scholarships available.
Okay, so few spots and few scholarships still available. So 26th May is the deadline for Transformative Sustainability and 9th June for the other MSc programs. So to the audience, if you are looking to apply to any of the programs that, and Veronica, if we can go back to the slide with the programs, I think there was this list where we could see all the programs. Yeah, so if you're looking to any of these, applying to any of these programs, then there's still time for the 2022 intake. You can still apply and start your studies within this year itself. If you're looking for any guidance, any help around that, or any clarification, please do reach out to graduateservices@unibakoni.it. The email address is in the chat window. If you have any further guidance or any doubts and you would want to speak with the team at SEED to clarify those doubts or help you clarify any of those your queries, you can reach out to us as well. You'd have received some reminder emails from us. You'd have got some WhatsApp reminders from us as well. So you could just get in touch with us on that number or write us an email and we would help you clarify those doubts as well. So thank you. With that, Veronica, we are over time. We still have around 170 people in the room. So very engaging session.
Thank you for staying with us.
Absolutely. It's a very important topic and it's good to see the youth of the country taking the topic very seriously and paying attention to such a sensitive and important and relevant topic in today's day and age. So thank you to the audience. Thank you for staying with us. Thank you for attending this session. It's been a pleasure hosting you and hosting Bocconi University as well. And thank you again. Have a great evening. Have a great evening, Veronica, and take care.
Buonasera, arrivederci a Milano.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Zaid. Thank you.